The fundamentals of the whole economic condition are divine in nature and are associated with the world of the heart and spirit. This is fully explained in the Bahá'í teachings, and without no knowledge of its principles, no improvement in the economic state can be realized. The Baha'is will bring about this improvement and betterment, but not through sedition and appeal to physical force, not through warfare, but welfare. Hearts must be so cemented together, love must become so dominant that the rich shall most willingly extend assistance to the poor and take these steps to establish these economic adjustments permanently. If it is accomplished in this way, it will be most praiseworthy because then it will be for the sake of God and in the pathway of his service. For example, it will be as if the rich inhabitants of a city should say, "It is neither just nor lawful that we should possess great wealth while there is abject poverty in this community," and then willingly give their wealth to the poor, retaining only as much as will enable them to live comfortably. Abdul Baha.
Our speaker this week is Dr. Augusto Lopez-Claros, and his topic is Spiritual Solutions to Global Economic Problems from a Baha'i Perspective. Dr. Augusto Lopez-Claros is an international economist with over 30 years of experience in international organizations, including most recently at the World Bank. For the 2018-2019 academic years, Augusto Lopez-Claros was on leave from the World Bank as a senior fellow at the Edmund Walsh School of Foreign Service at Georgetown University. He has a degree in mathematical statistics from Cambridge University, England, and a PhD in economics from Duke University in the United States. Dr. Lopez-Claros has written and lectured extensively on a wide range of topics in his field, including European economic integration, the determinants of competitiveness, reform issues in transition economies, economic dimensions of gender inequality, and on a broad range of financial and macroeconomic issues affecting emerging markets. More recently, he has written on global governance issues. And with that, I'll hand it off to Dr. Lopez-Claros.
Thank you very much, Bayan and Bita, for your introductions and for you reading that wonderful quote from Abdul Baha. Abdul Baha is actually the one central figure in our faith who has perhaps more than anybody else, spoken widely about some of the principles underpinning the Baha'i approach to economics. You know that when you actually read the writings and some of the statements made by the guardian of the Baha'i faith, Shoghi Effendi, who was the head of the Baha'i community from 1921 until 1957, he specifically said that, you know, there are no kind of practical, technical teachings on economics. That in fact, the contribution of the faith, and I'm quoting, to this subject is essentially indirect, he said, as it consists of the application of spiritual principles to our present-day economic system. Baha'u'llah, Shoghi Effendi says, has given us a few basic principles which should guide future Baha'i economists in establishing such institutions which will adjust the economic relationships of the world. So, having read that and taken note that, in fact, we don't have a detailed system, economic system to offer to the world, nevertheless, Abdul Baha, especially during the time that he was traveling in America, he outlined some of these principles on which he said we should have or base a new economic order. And what I like to share with you today is, you know, what are some of these principles and how is a Baha'i approach to economic issues different from what is being done in the rest of the world, within governments, in the academic community, within civil society organizations, and so on. So the Baha'i faith contains a kind of a broad range of principles on which to build economic systems. I use the word systems in the plural to indicate that it is quite conceivable that in the future we're going to have different systems existing simultaneously in different places of the world, reflecting the values of different societies. There are countries in the world, Finland, Norway, Sweden, Denmark, and Iceland, the Nordic countries, which have developed their own very unique economic system. It has, for instance, very extensive levels of social protection. They tend to have high tax rates. The government generates a great deal of government revenue, and then they have built up a very extensive safety net. Everybody has access to healthcare. Everybody has access to education. If you travel in these countries, you will see that they have excellent infrastructure, that there is no extreme poverty, that when people lose their jobs, there is a very extensive safety net which will protect them from need and from hunger and from other problems associated with unemployment. And to get this very important, substantial safety net in place, they have high taxation, much higher than you would find here in the United States or in other countries in the world. And that is their system. It is something that they have opted for. These are highly developed democratic societies, and through the democratic process, they have chosen to have a system that has a great deal of social protection and a safety net that protects all of the population. Not only that, but the Nordic countries actually frame their economic system in a kind of a long-term perspective. They are saving now so that the state 20, 30 years from now is going to be able to meet its obligations, especially as people age and become older and as the population becomes grayer, as they say. Whereas in other countries, such as ours here in the United States, we're not making provisions for the future. Most economists will tell you that the Social Security system 10, 15 years from now in the United States is going to be in great difficulty because it won't be able to pay all the benefits and all the obligations that the state has contracted. Unless, of course, reforms are introduced in the next few years, which change the system in a fundamental way. So we live in a world in which one could see in the future different systems emerging, reflecting the values, the preferences of democratic societies, right? So that's the first point I wanted to make. Now, a Baha'i economist, I mean, an economist such as myself, who considers himself a member of the Baha'i community and identifies himself with the principles of the Baha'i faith, the unity of mankind, the equality of men and women, the essential harmony of science and religion, the independent investigation of the truth, and so on. When you approach the subject of economics, you basically face a challenge at the outset. Essentially, because we Baha'is, our teachings, view man and women as having both a material and a spiritual nature, and that these two natures are closely interconnected. The Baha'i writings say that the purpose of life on this plane is to acquire virtues. And our success ultimately as human beings depends on our ability to transcend the purely material and to aspire and reach the spiritual. In fact, Baha'u'llah, the founder of the Baha'i faith, has a statement where he says, and I will quote, he says that the purpose underlying all of the world's religions, not just the Baha'i faith, but Christianity, Islam, Buddhism, Judaism, all of them, has been to educate all men, and he means women as well, of course, that they may, at the hour of death, ascend in the utmost purity and sanctity and with absolute detachment to the throne of the Most High. This is a very poetic, very beautiful way of saying that we are here on this material plane not to accumulate wealth, not to accumulate fame and glory and notoriety and recognition, not to become celebrities, not even to become experts in our fields, although that is welcome and that's certainly not something to be frowned upon. No, fundamentally we're here to develop our spiritual attributes and capacities so that when we leave this world at the moment of our death, we will do so, he says, in a state of purity and sanctity and absolute detachment. See, that is an entire rethinking of the purpose of life. You know, it goes completely counter to our contemporary values. If you ask people in the street, if you ask students in universities, if you ask government officials working tirelessly to promote government policies all over the world, what are you here for? What is the purpose of existence? They're not going to frame their answer as Baha'u'llah has put it. They will not say, my purpose is to develop my spiritual attributes so that I will leave this world in a state of purity and sanctity. And yet that is what the founder of the Baha'i Faith is saying is the purpose of men and women, not just from a Baha'i perspective, but from the perspective of every other major religion in the world. That concept is really revolutionary. It is amazing, and it is something that we should all think about. Furthermore, we Baha'is reject an approach to the study of economic issues that reflects a concern, an exclusive concern with the purely material aspects of life. And unfortunately, you know, this is very much the approach chosen by contemporary economics, which views you, me, people in the street as essentially rational beings pursuing their own self-interest, which is generally defined in material terms. All right. So rather than studying human behavior as it is now observed and deducing economic principles from these observations, you know, saying, for instance, oh, you know, people are selfish, so let's devise an economic system that is in accordance with that selfishness or with that aggressiveness or self-centeredness, you know. A Baha'i approach would instead offer a vision of what people can be and then ask, what kind of institutions, systems, laws, and regulations would we want to create which would help people to achieve this potential, right? It's a completely different approach, right? We start out by saying, you know, human beings may be noble creatures, and how can we develop an economic system that nurtures that nobility and that creates an environment where they can fulfill the purpose for which they have been created, which is to acquire virtues so that they will leave this world in a state of purity and sanctity. You know, Baha'u'llah has a quote where he says that regard man, and he always means women as well, as a mine rich in gems of inestimable value. What does this mean? That we are mines with gems of inestimable value? Well, he's essentially talking about, you know, our potential. We come into this world with capacities and attributes. He says that these capacities and attributes are universal. What does he mean by universal? It means everybody has them. They are intrinsic to who we are. Nobody can take them away from you. They are very much at the center, or should be at the center, of our sense of self-esteem. We should feel good about ourselves because we have been brought into this world with these divine gifts, and an important part of the purpose of our lives is to develop these gifts for the benefit of ourselves and the benefit of society. And I love the metaphor that he uses of these gems, and the idea of a mine. A mine, you have to excavate, you have to drill, you have to remove tons of debris and rocks and so on to get at what lies hidden in the mine, which may be gold, it may be diamonds, it may be some precious metals, right? But it involves a difficult task. It involves separating a great deal of debris from what lies within, which are these gems. And therefore, I think that thinking about the Baha'i contribution to economic thought, we would want to devise systems which allow us to facilitate this process of revealing our treasures, bringing out the gems that are hidden within our souls. And this, to me, is a fundamentally pragmatic approach. Shoghi Effendi, one of my favorite quotes from Shoghi Effendi, the head of the Baha'i community in the 1920s, 30s, 40s, he said the following. He said, legal standards, political and economic theories are solely designed to safeguard the interests of humanity as a whole, and not humanity to be crucified for the preservation of the integrity of any particular law or doctrine. Shoghi Effendi wrote this, I think, in the 1930s, and in the 1930s, we were in the middle of some horrendous experiments, such as the Soviet experiment, right? And what was being done in the Soviet Union? Well, they had a doctrine, and they basically were trying to implement the doctrine, even though it became clear very quickly that the doctrine was based on some flawed principles which were not working. And what did they do? Did they change course? Did they revise the doctrine or the ideology? Not at all. They basically pursued, and along the way, they sacrificed millions and millions of people. In the 1930s, 7 million people died of hunger in the Ukraine because the government decided to collectivize agriculture. Up to that time, farmers had private plots of land which they would cultivate, and they would sell their produce, and they would keep some of the produce for themselves. And this was the basis of the economy in the Ukraine. The Ukraine was a republic of the Soviet Union, but it was the breadbasket of the Soviet Union. The Ukraine has some of the most fertile agricultural land in the world to this day. So it was the source of much of the wheat and much of the grain for the rest of the country. When the government collectivized agriculture, basically meaning that the state took over all the farms, and it turned the farmers not into private landowners, but rather into government employees who were obligated to surrender their product to the government, this whole system collapsed. And 7 million people died of hunger in the 1930s because agricultural output collapsed, right? So did the system change? Did the government say, oh, this is not working, let's think of something better? Not at all. They persisted. They persisted for decades to come. When I went and lived in Russia in the 1990s, I visited agricultural collective farms, and they were doing still what they were doing in the 1930s and the 1940s, right? Shoghi Effendi says, this is absolute madness. No, he says, our economic systems, our economic theory should be geared to enhance the welfare of humanity. And if a particular doctrine, a particular policy is not working, you abandon it. You measure the success of doctrines and theories and policies in terms of whether they bring good to humanity, whether they create welfare and prosperity. And if they don't, you abandon them. It is like a medicine. If a medicine makes you sick, you throw it away. You discard it, because the purpose of medicine is to improve your health. And you say, well, this is so obvious, and yet, it is obvious, but our history, our entire history is basically a series of terrible mistakes where, as Shoghi Effendi says, we have sacrificed millions and millions of people for the sake of the preservation of a particular ideology. So we Baha'is have a great practical sense. And this analogy of the medicine, Abdul Baha used it very effectively when he was at Stanford University in respect of religion. He said religion should bring people together, should create bonds of love and fellowship among human beings. Religion is a medicine that should cure the ills of mankind. If it doesn't do that, it's a poison and you should abandon it. He said, if religion separates people and establishes distances between the hearts of people, it would be better to live under irreligious conditions. All right. So, what I like to do in the next few minutes is to talk about two kinds of principles which one can identify in the Baha'i writings in respect of economics. One set of principles are those that bear directly on the individual, or let's say small groups. And then the second set of principles are those that bear on broader society and nation states. And the Baha'i Faith has to say something on both of these areas. Baha'u'llah teaches that the material world is a metaphor for spiritual realities. You cannot divorce spiritual teachings and principles from daily material life. Spiritual progress doesn't take place in a vacuum. It's not the result of you going out into the mountains and leading a monastic life of self-absorption and contemplation. No. The concept of spirituality in the Baha'i Faith is a concept that sees the individual, you, me, others, our friends, our relatives, very much engaged with the world. Spirituality takes place in the context of the family. It takes place in the context of our jobs, our work, our cities, our local communities, our nations, the world as a whole, right? And for this reason, in the Baha'i writings, one sees a great deal of emphasis being played on things like, for instance, service to others. The Baha'i writings say that service to humanity, service to others, through your profession, through your calling in life, through your actions, is the highest, is the fulfillment of your highest nature. We become fulfilled as human beings, to the extent that we serve other people. I will make a parenthesis here to tell you an anecdote, which I think illustrates this principle in a very poignant way. My wife and I lived in Russia for many years in the 1990s. And of course, as you can imagine, we made many good friends among Russian people. Well, one of the friends that we made was this lady who had been a member of parliament in the 1990s. And then on a visit that I made with my daughter must have been about 10 years ago, in 2009, as I remember, we invited this lady, Nadezhda was her name, which literally means hope. And I think the name Hope exists in the English language. We invited Hope and a couple of other members of the Baha'i community, a husband and wife team who were members of the National Assembly and very dear friends of ours. We invited them to have tea with us at the hotel. And when Hope came, she looked a little frail, and I asked her, how are you? Are you in good health? Because she seemed a little frail. She was normally a very energetic, very robust person. And so she told us, myself and this couple who were having tea, she told us that she had been in a serious accident in India. She had gone to India as a tourist. And one day, she had gone out on a bus tour, and they had made a stop at a village. And while she was out sightseeing in the village, all of a sudden she realized that the bus was leaving, and it was leaving without her. And so she started running after the bus and literally tried to jump on the bus because, you know, the driver wouldn't hear her to stop. And as this happened, she fell under the bus and she was run over. And then, to cut a long story short, she spent the next 6 weeks in coma. And then she said, she was telling us around tea time, she said that she had a profound spiritual experience during that period that she was in coma. These are called near-death experiences. And it's a scientifically studied phenomena. It has been extensively documented by scientists, by neurologists and other people. And there are commonalities among the experiences of the people who have come back from what is called a near-death experience. And so we asked her, well, what were the insights that you derived from this harrowing period where she was in coma? And she said that my insight into the meaning of life was that we are here in this world to bring blessings to the lives of other people, to bring blessings to the lives of our family members, our children, our parents, our community. To the extent that we do that, we are fulfilling our purpose in life. You see, that is such a powerful insight, and it is completely consistent with what the founder of the Baha'i Faith, Baha'u'llah, is saying is the purpose of life. All right, so I was saying that one of the principles is service to others, but there are others. Baha'u'llah emphasizes enormously the concept of truthfulness and trustworthiness. Truthfulness and trustworthiness. Let me ask you a question. Do you think that the global financial crisis in 2008 and 2009 would have taken place if people working in the financial markets had been trustworthy and truthful? No, not at all. That crisis happened because there were abuses that were made in the financial system. That crisis had a very strong underpinning of failed ethics and failed morality. Baha'u'llah says that the basis of prosperity, the basis of being good in business is to develop a sense of truthfulness and trustworthiness in your relationship with your clients. If you have a factory, if you produce products and these are of shoddy quality, if you're cheating your customers, are you going to be prosperous? Is your company going to be sustainable? Not at all. Eventually the word will go out. Don't buy from this guy because he's not trustworthy, because he produces things which sometimes work and sometimes don't. And truthfulness, of course, the founder of the Baha'i Faith says is the foundation of all virtues. Lying, distorting information, creating alternative facts, as they are now called in our contemporary society, is essentially undermining the very basis of the meaning of life, right? And it is bad for the economy, and it's bad for business. Integrity and honesty, self-reliance. In the Baha'i Faith, there is a prohibition against begging, because Baha'u'llah says we are to be self-reliant. We are to acquire skills and knowledge so that we can support ourselves and we can support our families. Which is not to say that sometimes tragedies occur. Sometimes people come into this world handicapped. You know, we have in the world, because of mismanagement of our global economy, 820 million people who are malnourished. Means they haven't received enough nutrients and vitamins and minerals in the early stage of the development of their brains. And as a result of that, they are handicapped. They have limitations. They will struggle in life. Right? And there is a place for our societies and our governments and our systems to support these people, to provide them with opportunity and where necessary to protect them from hunger and from need, to give them access to health and so on. So, but that's different. That's different. We're talking about, healthy people who have capacities and who have talents. Baha'u'llah says, develop those capacities, develop those talents, be self-reliant, acquire a profession and develop skills so that you will be served to others and to your families and to yourselves. Right? So a great deal of emphasis is put on developing these qualities, these spiritual qualities, as the very foundation of a sound economy. Service to others, trustworthiness, truthfulness, integrity, honesty, all of these are absolutely essential. Okay? Now, as I said, there are also other things which are of a different nature, which have to do with how we organize society, not spiritual values, which are important, which I have just mentioned, but other aspects that have to do with the kinds of institutions that we build in the world to support an economy that is more equitable and that generates more opportunity and more wealth for the majority of people in the world. Right? And here, Abdul Baha had very interesting proposals as he was traveling in America. See, Abdul Baha was very, very sensitive to the needs of other people. He was highly perceptive, highly aware of his surroundings. And as he was traveling America in 1912, you can tell that in America, even though it was at that time a country already industrialized and relatively wealthy, there were still, huge pockets of need, of limitation. There was no safety net. There were no pensions. There was no Medicare and Medicaid. If you lost your job, there was no unemployment compensation that you could claim to tide you over until you found a new job. It was very much a kind of a Darwinian economy. And Abdul Baha must have sensed this very, very powerfully, because in many of the talks that he gave, he talked about the need to create a new economy, a new economic and social order. He even used a phrase for it. He called it the New Jerusalem. He said in the Bible, when the phrase is used, the New Jerusalem, it means that. It means creating an economic system that will eliminate poverty and that will narrow the extremes of wealth and poverty. And in that context, he had a number of practical suggestions, like progressive system of taxation, where the wealthier will pay a higher tax on rising levels of income. He talked about profit sharing. He talked about the safety net. The Baha'i faith is firmly identified with the principle that we should eliminate poverty, that we should organize our affairs, we should organize our tax systems, and our policies should be centered around the objective of eliminating poverty altogether, permanently, forever. Have we done that? Not at all. We have made progress in eliminating what the World Bank calls extreme poverty, which is $1.19 of daily income, which is virtually nothing, right? This definition of extreme poverty, and we have about 800 million people in the world who are categorized as extremely poor, is an unusually tough definition. You wouldn't want your worst enemy to be extremely poor, meaning living on an annual basis with less than $700 per year, right? It means you don't have access to healthcare. It means that if your husband loses his job, the following day you have nothing to feed your children. It means you don't have access to potable water, to sanitation. It basically means you live on the border of great need and insecurity. When Abdul Baha was traveling in America, he said, look, poverty is not just low income. When you are poor, it doesn't just mean that you cannot afford to buy things and pay your bills and so on. No, poverty brings with it a psychological trauma. It brings It brings with it stress. It brings worry and preoccupation. If you are very poor and you cannot pay your bills, and you're not sure whether your children will be able to be fed adequately, you are constantly living in a world of stress and tension, right? So there is that psychological dimension to poverty as well, which is the reason why Abdul Baha emphasized to such an extent the need to eliminate poverty altogether. And how do you do this? Well, he was making proposals. You have a progressive system of taxation. You design a system where the wealthy are going to pay more so that this money can be distributed to meet the needs of the poor. And he spoke about the need to create a universal safety net below which nobody would fall, right? That would include things like education, like public health, maybe housing, maybe food. Why not? Malnutrition is a bad investment for all of us, You think, oh, well, I was happy to be born in Norway or in Sweden or in Germany or in the United States. My parents are going to feed me when I am a child, and I'm going to develop my brain adequately. I'm not going to be malnourished. So you feel good about yourself, right? But when we have 820 million people in the world who are malnourished, that is not just a huge liability for the people who suffer from malnutrition. It is a liability for all of us together, because these people are not going to be able to make the contribution which they would have been able to make if they have developed their capacities to the full extent, because they had access to good nutrition, right? So we all lose as a result of this, right? And Abdul Baha understood that perfectly well, which is why he called for a system, an economic system that would wipe out poverty permanently, forever, not just in the United States, all over the world. Unfortunately, in 2020, because of COVID, because of this pandemic, which is such a calamity, we are moving in the opposite direction. The World Bank estimates that by 2021, 150 million people will have fallen below the extreme poverty line, which is horrible. In other words, instead of having 800 extremely poor people, by next year, we might have 950 or 900, between 900 and 950 million of extremely poor people. And this is a tragedy. It is a tragedy, in 2015, the United Nations established the Sustainable Development Goals for 2030. 17 Sustainable Development Goals, and the United Nations said governments should design their economic policies so that we all achieve these 17 goals. Sustainable Goal number 5, for instance, is to eliminate all forms of discrimination against women and girls. Bravo, a great goal. We should all be working for that. We Baha'is in particular, who are such great believers in the equality of men and women, should actively promote Sustainable Development Goal number 5, right? What is Sustainable Development Goal number 1? It is to eliminate extreme poverty. And we're going in the opposite direction. Rather than making progress this year in 2020, we're moving in the opposite direction. And, this is a tragedy. It's not something that we could have anticipated, right? So Baha'is are firmly identified with this idea that poverty must be done away with permanently. Furthermore, Baha'u'llah introduced a law that applies to the members of the Baha'i community only, which in fact, it is my opinion, it is intended to set an example for the rest of the world. And I am referring in particular to the law of the Huququllah, or the right of God, which essentially establishes a spiritual obligation for Baha'is to voluntarily give a share of their resources to the head of the Baha'i community so that these resources can be used for such things as lightening the burden of necessity, such as educating those children who, because their parents don't have enough resources, cannot educate their children, and other social objectives. So within our own community, we are practicing what we're preaching. Our community, little by little, as it grows, will set the example for the rest of the world in terms of creating a safety net and protecting the members of our community from extreme poverty and from extreme need. There are other teachings, of course, in the Baha'i Faith, which apply to nations and societies. I've already talked about those spiritual principles, which should be at the basis of a good economy. But in the Baha'i Faith, there are other teachings. For instance, this is a very innovative, very provocative, I would even say, statement that you find in the Baha'i writings. We live in a world in which, if you are lucky enough to be born in Norway, you are going to have a life of security, and all your needs are going to be met. There aren't that many Norwegians anyway. There's only about 5 million of them. All right. So if you got the lottery when you came into this world, and your parents were Norwegian and you were born in Norway, the government has stashed away more than $1 trillion to make sure that they have enough money to pay your pensions, your social security, so that when you reach your old age, there is going to be one of the world's best health systems with the latest technologies, ready to help you whenever you have a headache or a toothache or some other more serious problem, right? Well, good for the Norwegians, but if you're born in Ghana, if you're born in Sierra Leone, if you're born in some other sub-Saharan African country, you might not make it to the age of 1. You might die in infancy from some kind of infectious disease. You might not receive enough nutrients in your early childhood and therefore become one of these 820 million malnourished children. And are you going to receive education, all educational opportunities and facilities? Well, maybe yes, maybe not. We don't know. It will depend on who your parents are, right? Now, the question I ask you, and which the Baha'i Faith asks rhetorically to the rest of the world, is this justice? Is this fair? Can we accept this state of things, right? Do you get to choose your parents? No, you didn't. You didn't. This is who your parents are, whether they were born in Norway or in Sierra Leone, is a complete accident of history, right? And this is just not acceptable. We should not have a world in which your fate, your future as a human being, is linked to a random event, which is the nationality of your parents, which you did not choose. Nobody gave you the option to choose and say, hey, what kind of parents would you like to have? And then, of course, if you knew about the kind of world that we live in, you would have said, please, 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 let my parents be Norwegian, all right? But that choice was never given to us, right? And so in the Baha'i Faith, there is this principle which says that control of the world's resources, right? Because why is Norway so wealthy? It's because they have a lot of oil and natural gas. Why are some countries in sub-Saharan Africa so poor? Where part of the reason is lack of resources. There are some countries in Africa which are not viable. They haven't got very much that they can actually market or sell abroad. Part of it is obviously the limitations that come as a result of lack of education and lack of resources, which then create for bad government and so on and so forth, right? Well, in the Baha'i writings, we think that the world will gradually move to a situation where we are going to have very strong institutions which are going to help us govern the world in a more effective way. And in that context, the Baha'i Faith says that these global institutions, will have access to the world's resources and will be able to ensure that there is a safety net for everybody so that nobody is extremely poor. The Baha'i Faith is not saying that in the future, our Norwegian brothers and sisters are going to be deprived of the bountiful natural resources which they have, especially oil and natural gas. No, it's not saying that. What it is saying is that there is a scope for organizing a system where those countries that have vast natural resources make a contribution to the income and to lighten the burden of poverty of those countries that don't have very much, right? We already do that within the context of highly developed societies. The United States, the members of the European Union, they all have developed tax systems which essentially try to protect the very poor, which is the reason why in many countries in Europe there is virtually no extreme poverty, because the system is already working. The societies have accepted the notion of redistribution at some level to create a safety net for the very poor. So the world needs to move in that direction, and the Baha'i Faith is advocating that in a very strong way. So this gives you, my friends, an overview of this subject. A great deal more can be said, but I think that I have said enough. This is an area that Baha'i economists and others are exploring. I think that 2020 and the context of the pandemic is a very especially interesting year, because it is leading to a kind of a challenging of our thinking. Let me give you an example. I love this example because it involves the principle of equality between men and women. All right. If I were to ask you to make a list of the countries that have managed COVID the best, right, that are sort of case studies in good management of the pandemic, right? Which are these countries? Well, I would say New Zealand. Everybody's talking about New Zealand because they have had very few cases, very few fatalities. Taiwan. You know how many people have died of COVID in Taiwan? I think 7 people, right? In an island that has like 30 million people, right? In New Zealand, I think 25 people have died of COVID, right? So these are countries that somehow, even though this is a global pandemic, have managed the crisis in a way that has protected people. The other countries that come to mind are Germany, Finland, Iceland, and Norway. You know what is common to all these 6 countries? They're all run by women. Prime ministers and heads of state, they're all women, right? In fact, couple of statistics. The United Nations has 193 member countries. You know how many are run by women, either as prime ministers or heads of state? 21. About 10%, somewhere between 10 and 11%. So we're still living in a world that is highly male-dominated. In fact, if you ask yourself, of all the successful cases of COVID management, what percent are accounted for by countries run by women? It turns out 40%. So they only have 10% of the world's top positions, but they have 40% of the world's the most successful cases of COVID management, right? Now, why? Why? The question is why? Well, I'll give you an idea as to why. Do you think that the security of the people is important, right? Let's suppose that you are a prime minister or head of a state, and then a journalist, sort of comes up to you as you're walking out of your office and says, "Dear Mr. Prime Minister, dear head of state, is the security of your citizens important?" And of course, everybody will say, "Yes, it is important." Right? But the difference between men in power and women in power is that the men tend to understand security in militaristic terms. Yeah. When men talk about national security, the first thing they talk about is the army, the Navy, the Air Force, weapon systems, our ability to bring death and destruction to those who don't like us, our enemies, right? Security traditionally has been framed in that perspective, right? Well, it turns out that women tend to see security from a different perspective. Security is seen more in terms of human welfare, is seen in terms of, are we healthy? Are we getting access to education? Are we getting access to some of the basic necessities of life? What does COVID-19 tell you? That you may have the the largest military, and I'm not just talking about the United States, Russia, China, all these countries are spending vast sums of resources strengthening their militaries. China especially, is rapidly emerging as the world's #2 military power. All right, so my question to you is, in the middle of a pandemic, how useful has it been to you, my dear fellow Americans, to have the most powerful military in the world? Not very useful, right? So as you prepare for the future, maybe we should rethink the meaning of security. Maybe security should mean to be protected next time there is another pandemic, more lethal than this one, right? So do you see, this is the reason why the Baha'i Faith is so strongly in favor of the economic and the political empowerment of women, because it will lead to a complete shift in perspective, and it will put human happiness, human welfare, human security at the center. We'll go back and we will rethink what Baha'u'llah said to Edward Brown in 1890, when he lamented to him and he said, "We see your leaders and kings more preoccupied in building those weapon systems which are good for the destruction of the human race, rather than in that which will be conducive to the happiness of mankind." Okay, friends, I have spoken long enough, and so with the permission of the chair, I think I will stop, and I'm certainly happy to entertain any questions that you may have. Thank you.
Thank you so much for your talk, Dr. Lopez-Claros. It was really interesting. I think a lot of great points were made. So yes, now we can have a Q&A portion, and if you have a question, you can either write it in the chat and I'll read it out loud, or you can use the Zoom raise hand function and I'll unmute you, and you can find that by clicking participants and then the blue hand. So our first question is from Merdad, so I will unmute him now.
Muchas gracias, Dr. Augusto Lopez. Encantado de conocerle. I'm very happy to have met you and enjoyed your wonderful speech very much. I have two simple questions. If I'm not wrong, and please correct me if I am, I have read from the beloved Master Abdul Baha that the best economical system would be in the future not necessarily a capitalistic system, but what we call today, like you mentioned, in the Scandinavian countries, they have, what system would you call it? There's a word that everybody shuns nowadays that we call it the help me out if I may ask you. The economical system of not necessarily communistic, but in the middle between the two, capitalistic or communistic, we have this, what many people unfortunately have misunderstood, the system that we call
Socialism.
socialism in a way, but there's another word I'm looking for. In Farsi and Arabic, Abdul Baha calls it mushtarakiyun, meaning sharing. It's socialism, but it's a little slightly different. Would you like to speak on that? And then I'll ask you my second question.
Yes, I'm happy to to comment on this. You know, these countries, the Nordic countries, all five of them, Finland, Sweden, Norway, Iceland, and Denmark, they are market economies, all right? That's the first thing I want to say. They're market economies. The vast majority of the economy is in the hands of the private sector, right? The government in these countries does not control industries, does not control the banking system. These are essentially market economies where the vast majority of goods and services and jobs are created by the private sector, right? So that's the first important fact that we need to get clear in our minds when we talk about the Nordic countries, right? Number two, did you know that these are some of the most competitive economies in the world? These are very innovative, very sophisticated countries on the cutting edge of science and technology. You know, a few years ago, before Apple, what was the leading telephone company in the world? It was Nokia, right, in Finland. So although these are relatively small countries, they have a huge footprint in terms of the production of high technology, medication, medicines, and other areas, right? So that's fact number two, right? The reason I'm mentioning some of these achievements is because there is this perception that these countries somehow, because they are sometimes characterized as being socialist, must be a kind of an inheritors of the Soviet tradition, right? Not at all. It has nothing to do one with the other. Third, they are highly democratic, highly developed democratic societies, right? The kind of polarization and tribalism that you see in places like the United States today, does not exist in these societies. I know, I have traveled there extensively. I have been to Sweden at least 10 times in the last 3-4 years. I know these countries intimately well. And what I am really impressed is not only that they're, well-developed democracies, but they have developed a certain sort of consensus, a sense of across the political spectrum, whether the government is a little bit right-leaning or left-leaning, they essentially have the same approach to economic governance, right? So do I think that they are a model for the rest of the world? I think in some ways, yes. I think that protecting people and providing an extensive safety net is important. I think that having a large section of your population, like the United States, have no access to health insurance is a misguided policy. Look, in the middle of a pandemic, if 30 million people in your country don't have access to health, that puts at risk everybody else, right? If people don't have sick leave as a benefit from working, and then the government says, "Oh, we have to have a lockdown," the people who don't have access to sick leave as a benefit are going to continue to work because they depend on that income, right? So the Nordic countries have already understood that solidarity is good for everybody. solidarity is not just a kind of a aimless, meaningless spiritual attribute. Solidarity also involves an element of self-protection. When everybody is protected, when everybody has access to essential services, we are all better off, right? So having said that, you know, is this model replicable in other parts of the world? Well, what I would say is, yeah, I mean, countries can adopt it if they wish, but there may be countries where perhaps people, civil society, the business community are not ready to have the tax burden that the Swedes and the Norwegians and the Finnish have, right? Because all of this costs money, right? You know, I am very familiar with, let's say, Chile in Latin America. The tax collected by the government in Chile is about half the level of the tax collected by the governments in the Nordic countries. And if you talk to businessmen, if you talk to people in the street in a country like Chile, would you like to have the level of taxation that the Swedes and the Norwegians have? They will tell you, no, 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 thank you very much, right? And so it's a choice that they're making, right? It's a choice that you have to respect that. In the context of countries that are democratic, you have to respect the choice of the public. And so that is why at the beginning of my presentation, I said that in the future, we might have many different systems. I think they will be based on some core principles, like poverty elimination, like eliminating extremes of wealth and poverty and so on. But within those core principles, you can still have variety and you can still have different approaches.
If I may, the second part of my question is actually, I too have lived in numerous countries, to be exact in 10, and 4 or 5 of these 10 countries have been socialist countries, such as Chile and currently in Ecuador. And although I'm a US citizen, I prefer to live in a socialist community society. Just as you mentioned, one of the many reasons is the healthcare. Socialist countries provide wonderful healthcare. I dare say almost perfect healthcare for a very small fragment of the cost of healthcare in the US. And having studied this phenomenon, I've come to the conclusion that it is socialism that provides lower costs. And I don't mean to criticize any doctors or anyone who works in healthcare, but it is my understanding that in non-socialist countries, that the healthcare is not regulated, or let's say the government has no control over it. People, the surgeons would put you under their knives just to make money. And
Yeah.
that is not the case in socialist countries, because the doctors get paid by the government, and you don't pay them anything. There's no copay. My wife had both knees operated, and myself, I had a heart procedure. It cost us zero, nothing.
Right. You know, what I would urge you is don't call them socialist countries. That is going to create a kind of immediate negative reaction among the people that you talk to. Canada is not a socialist country. No. Germany, France, the United Kingdom, Norway, Italy, Spain, they are not socialist countries, and yet they deliver, you know, universal healthcare to everybody, regardless of their job situation, regardless of their level of income, right? So if I'm going to characterize the existence of universal healthcare, I will say that it is a sign of sophistication and civilization. It is a sign of solidarity and good management, right? It is good public policy. I will not say it's socialist in nature. Okay. Thank you, Armin, for the invitation. I think this is an excellent initiative. I have enjoyed every minute of this. I can tell by your faces that we have had a good discussion. And if Armin and the organizers of this platform invite me again, I will never say no. Okay?
Thank you so much again for your talk. So now I'll just introduce our speaker for next week. Our speaker next week will be Steve Sarowitz, and his topic will be Material Wealth and Spiritual Wealth, a Baha'i Perspective. And again, these talks occur every Saturday at noon Eastern Standard Time, so please invite your friends and family. And again, if you're new to the Baha'i Faith, or if you'd like to be added to our mailing list, please fill out the Google form that we'll put in the chat below. And now we're just going to close with a Baha'i prayer set to music.
Help me, Lord, help me, please. In these times of tests, help me overcome these. Help me, Lord, help me, please. In these times of test, help me overcome these. Help me to triumph by the hosts of thy glorious kingdom, and shower upon me thy confirmations, which alone can change a gnat into an eagle, a drop of water into rivers and seas, an atom into lights and suns, an atom into lights and suns. Help me, Lord, help me, please. In these times of test, help me overcome these. Help me, Lord, help me, please. In these times of test, help me overcome these. Oh, help me to triumph by the host of thy glorious kingdom, and shower upon me thy confirmations, which alone can change a gnat into an eagle, a drop of water into rivers and seas, an atom into lights and suns. Oh, an atom into lights and suns, an atom into lights and suns, an atom into lights and suns.
Thank you so much, everyone. We'll see you next Saturday. Have a great week.